The people that are really losing in this country right now are the people that want to make healthy choices. But then they walk into the store really charged up for looking at, and they find packaging and things that literally are designed to confuse them or lie to them.
Wow. Thank you all so much for coming. It's great to see you all. Last time I was here was March 2nd, 2020. It was a great day to be here.
Right before the world shut down.
Exactly. And actually, I was talking about my book, Food Fix, which is about our food system and the challenges we have with the increasing burden of chronic illness, with the food policies that drive unintended consequences of increasing disease and costs and downstream effects on the environment, climate. And, I've been, very focused on this. I have a nonprofit called the Food Fix Campaign. Senator Booker and I have worked closely together on trying to change food policy. So you're probably wondering why a senator is here in a cookbook book party, basically. And it's because he deeply cares about the health of our country and the state of our food system and the challenges he's seen as a result. And we were just chatting earlier before. I was during COVID was sitting in Maui to escape America, mainland America, and I got this call from this number from New Jersey on a Sunday afternoon, and I picked up my phone. I normally don't answer numbers that I don't know, and it was Senator Booker, and he's like, "Mark, I just read your book, Food Fix, and it blew my mind, and I want to work with you on this. Let's go." So it's been an amazing, an amazing opportunity to really rethink how we deal with our health and our nation. So we're going to do kind of a joint conversation. It's not all me, not all him. We'll be talking about.
But can I advertise that the Food Fix? We'll talk about the cookbook, I hope. But it's one of the most basic primers for anybody that cares about your family, your food, and your country. And you don't pull punches in it by talking about the corruption that has created the American food system.
Right.
And I love how you talk about. In fact, you changed some of the things with me with civil rights organizations, because when people were coming to me and saying, "Here's our agenda for Black America,"
right,
and I would say, "How can you have an agenda for Black America without talking about the number one killer of African Americans? If Black Lives Matter, we have to talk about food and the food systems that people are trapped in." And you laid it out so plain, and then give instructions for people if you really want to fight to change the system, not just your own individual choices, but how do you create a system in this country, a food system that promotes health, wellness, longevity? Here are steps to take. So it's a great primer. And then I bought the book for members of the ad committee.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I bought the book for members of the ad committee. And what surprised me is a lot of people didn't know some of the basic things I know we'll talk about momentarily, but really scary things that are being subsidized with our tax dollars that are creating a system that's creating some of the greatest levels of chronic illness in the planet.
Yeah, that's true. And I think it's true. I don't think people in Congress really had a deep understanding of the way in which the burden on our country and our population and our economy is because of the food system and the unintended consequences of it.
Yeah. Well, this is a cookbook.
Yes.
And I think what's inspiring, I told you last night, I've never really read a cookbook. So whenever I interview friends and their books, I want to read them. And I'm not the greatest cook in the world. You've never invited yourself over for one of my meals. But the beginning of it really sets the stage for why you wrote this cookbook, and something that you've been this great evangelist of. And maybe you can start talking about what you learned or why you were inspired by the blue zones and what they are.
Well, I think I've always been interested in the science of creating health. That's what I do with functional medicine. And I think, it became really clear to me that, we're in a crisis where, we're in the moment of science where we know more and more about the root cause of illness and what to do about it. And yet we're seeing increasing rates of chronic disease, and we're seeing a decline in life expectancy for the first time in human history. And it's been year over year. COVID made it worse, but it was happening before COVID. And so while we have this sort of keys to longevity, to living a healthy 100 years, we haven't really addressed the reasons why we are so sick and overweight as a country. And 93% of Americans are metabolically unhealthy, which means they have either high blood sugar, high blood pressure, high cholesterol.
Hold on, 93%?
So actually, it's 93.2%.
Okay. Or metabolically unhealthy. What exactly does that mean?
They have some level of prediabetes or some degree of insulin resistance. So they basically have poor metabolic health. And that's defined as having high blood pressure, high blood sugar, abnormal cholesterol, they're overweight, or they've had a heart attack or stroke. That means only 6.8% of Americans don't have that. And that's why we're seeing the decline in life expectancy. And it's because of our food. And the food we eat is the biggest generator of either longevity or chronic illness. And in my book, Young Forever, which was a precursor to the cookbook, it was really mapping out the science we have around what the root causes of this chronic disease epidemic are and how we can actually extend healthy life years. So our health span is how many years we're alive. Are healthy, and our lifespan is how many years we're alive. But our health span has gone down dramatically. And the last 20% of people's life now is spent in poor health. And so your quality of life goes down, but we can have a health span that equals our lifespan. You've all heard stories of, so-and-so was 100 years old and she went to bed and went to sleep and had a nice dinner with her family before and she was great.
Right.
And I think we all want that. We all want to kind of move through life and have a great, healthy life and then die suddenly, as opposed to die slow, long, expensive, painful deaths, which is why we're seeing the burden on our healthcare system and our economy. So, the Blue Zones really taught me that it's really about the most basic things, right? It's the basic things of eating real food, of not eating all the processed food we're eating now, which is now 60% of our diet, is 67% of kids' diet. And these are new to nature foods. They're deconstructed science projects that have been well proven to cause a whole host of chronic diseases. There was a big report in the Lancet recently, like 37 different conditions that has been linked to mental health disorders, to fertility issues, to diabetes, heart disease, cancer. The list goes on. So we have to eat from not the ultra-processed food that we're eating to a more whole, real food diet. They exercise naturally as part of their life. I met a guy, Pietro, who was 95 years old, was a shepherd who would hike 5 miles up a day with his sheep every day. He was, both upright, clear eyes, booming voice, sharp as a tack, 95. You just don't see that in America. And they had a deep sense of community. So they had a sense of belonging, connection, and they ate together. They celebrated together. They lived together in a beautiful way. And even people, I met a woman named Julia. She was 100, and she said, I'm 103 months. and she, didn't have any kids, but she was living with her niece, and they were taking care of her. And she was still working at 100 years old, making doilies and things for weddings. And so they had a deep sense of connection and belonging. So the elements of longevity are really pretty simple. It's what we eat. It's how we move. It's our connection community. It's how we deal with stress. I think that, this guy Silvio I met, he was an amazing man. His family had this mountaintop kind of farm, and they had sheep and goats, and they made this beautiful dinner for us. And I said, Silvio, do you have any stress? He looked at me and didn't really quite know what I meant. I know stress when things are hard or difficult. And he's like, oh, yeah. I said, what? He said, well, sometimes at night, a goat will get out, and I'll have to go get it.
Yeah.
So we live in a time of chronic stress, both mental stress and environmental stresses and toxins we were talking about, and they don't have that. And we can't reproduce that exactly here, but we can learn a lot from the Blue Zones about how to create health.
Well, I don't want to lose the great stories at the beginning of this, because eating cheese with worms,
Well, that was a good story. You might have gone to that.
Why don't you tell that before I ask you my next question?
Well, there was a guy, Olinto, who basically was had his own farm, and he grew all his own vegetables, had animals, raised pigs and sheep and chickens and rabbits, and grew orchards. And he made us this sort of beautiful meal. And at the end, he brought out this kind of big round thing of cheese, and basically said, this is special Sardinian cheese that is made with worms. And he said it's supposedly an aphrodisiac. And he told the story of his grandfather who had this, and said his grandmother could still, enjoy him even after he died. So I don't know. It was kind of a weird story, but it was amazing. And I ate it, and I didn't die. It was kind of weird. But they basically have these traditional food ways that we've lost. And so getting back to food in its most basic form is a pretty simple idea, but it's something we've lost. And as a result of the food industry's efforts to take control of the American kitchen, to take control of the American farm, and to disenfranchise people from their own health, I think it's a national emergency, Cory. And I think we have to face this head on, because we're just heading down a road where, the burden of this is going to affect our children by living shorter sicker lives than their parents. It's going to affect our ability to be competitive in the world because of the burden of illness. I mean, we were 4% of the world's population in COVID, and we were 16% of the cases and deaths. Not because we were had worse medical care, but because we had a pre-inflamed sick population that was so susceptible to the virus when they got it.
4% of the population, 16%
Of the cases and deaths.
of the cases and deaths. So I want to pull back because there's something we're not trying to do, that you're not trying to do, which is this isn't about shaming people for their food choices.
No.
This isn't about shoulding all over people.
No.
You should do this, you should do that. Because I think when people read books, they start to feel bad about themselves or decisions they're trying to make. What I love about you and why you've been such a great ally and inspiration is you understand that we grew up in indigenous cultures,
Yeah.
you know, the African-American health versus Black people in Africa, depending on, it can be very dramatically different if they're still eating indigenous diets.
Yeah.
The China study showed that the Chinese were living incredibly healthy until they started shifting towards
Western diet.
the Western diet. So what we're really trying to say is, let's take a step back and look at the broken American food system, or what they call the standard American diet, the sad system that has created so much illness. Because we're not morally more lacking because we're sick and unhealthy, more different than our great-grandparents who were incredibly healthy.
Yeah.
I was watching, as one does, Soul Train. We're going to do a little Soul Train live. Thanks. Somebody in here knows what I'm talking about.
That was a long time ago, Cory.
And what stunned me when I watched Soul Train from the 1960s and 70s was how thin
Yeah.
and fit everybody was.
I mean, in the 60s, Black Americans were healthier than white Americans.
Yes. And because of the food systems in which Black Americans were stuck in. And so suddenly we've now shifted to this system. And what you're talking about is it is not a moral failing to be obese in America now. You are in a system that is so toxic, that is so designed for your unhealth. And what you are trying to do now, leading a leader in America is to tell the truth about this broken system and say that we collectively as a country not only can change it, there is a health emergency going on that we must change it. Yeah. And just some data that you and I were throwing back. I'm not sure if everybody here knows that 1 out of every 3 of your tax dollars that go to the federal government, is spent on health care. And a lot of those...
$1.8 trillion.
Yes.
And it is 40% of our total national spend on healthcare.
And 1 out of every $5 in our entire economy is going on healthcare. The overwhelming majority of that money is going to chronic diseases, the majority of which are preventable.
And are food related.
And so now think about this with the rates of diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, and what you call type 3 diabetes.
Alzheimer's.
Which is Alzheimer's. If you are tracing these expenditures on those, they're going up and up and up. And the pharma industry is designing really expensive drugs. We don't have to change the food system. We don't have to change the inputs. Just pop this pill, not to
or take this shot.
Yes.
If anybody hasn't watched the South Park episode on obesity, it's funny and also terrifying.
But they're designing drugs that we don't know what the side effects of these are. In fact, we know some of the side effects of the Alzheimer drugs that are really expensive, that people are flocking to, not to stop Alzheimer's or just to try to slow Alzheimer's. Yeah. When we know that access to fresh, healthy foods is transformative. We created it in Newark when I was mayor, turned an entire city block into an urban farm.
Yeah.
And I went back there with Food Inc. 2, which you saw to film. And while we were filming it, African-American women were coming out and wanted to testify. One woman said that her doctor said she had incurable gut problems, that she had to be on this medication that cost $700. She had a $100 copay. So she's paying a lot of money, $100 a month to her, and $600 a month to us as taxpayers. And then she started sourcing all of her food, and her doctor said, "Oh, it's a miracle. You're cured after eating all this food." Another woman came to me, 80-year-old octogenarian, who had created an Instagram account called the Octogenarian Vegan because she started eating all of her food, and her diabetes, which she had for years and years, she suddenly was off. You know this as a doctor, a functional medicine doctor, that these are not incurable problems if we change our input.
No.
So the point I want to make to you, and I hope that you'll expound upon it, is you have been focusing a lot on individual behavior. Yes, you've definitely helped me in my individual journey as a friend, but systemic change, you're saying, has got to be made in our system. And that's where we found alliances. Can you talk about what are the systemic changes that you're trying to make in our American?
Yeah, I mean, I think, our effort with the Food Fix campaign is really to educate lawmakers about the problem, which they had very low awareness of. I mean, you're one of the few who really gets it in Congress. And we're working on a number of different initiatives to help change policies that are driving the production of the wrong food and the eating of the wrong food. So, for example, we were helpful in the $20 billion that was in the Inflation Reduction Act that was to support climate-smart agriculture. We've been very aggressive in trying to work with Medicare to cover medically tailored meals, and you've introduced a bill in the Senate. And
Well, slow down. Let's take this pieces at a time. Let's go to food production in the United States.
yeah,
Our great-great-grandparents had a lot more plant and crop diversity, right?
100%. Yeah,
And this was before seeds were patented for their biology to withstand this thing called Roundup.
yeah.
So what is happening to our soil and the foods that we're growing right now? What is this monocropping, 5 crops that we're pouring sort of all over?
Yeah, I mean, basically, we have to fix our food system from the field to the fork.
Right.
And starting at the field is a big problem because commodity-based agriculture, corn, wheat, and soy, has been a boon to big agrochemical and agro-seed companies and big food producers, but not to the farmers who are suffering,
No.
both in terms of their health and their economic welfare.
Right.
And has also been extremely destructive to the ecosystem of the farm, which used to be a multi-crop, diverse ecosystem that now is a monocrop system that is farmed in ways that destroy the soil, the mycorrhizal fungi, the organic matter. 1/3 of all the carbon in the atmosphere today is from the soil. So driving climate change, the runoffs from the nitrogen fertilizer into our rivers and lakes is called eutrophication. It's creating dead zones the size of New Jersey. Nothing against New Jersey, but it's creating dead zones the size of New Jersey in the Gulf of Mexico. There's 400 of these around the world that feed 500 million people. The pesticides and herbicides are affecting farmers and us and affecting our health. We're seeing the inadequacy of the food that we used to grow, which was nutrient dense, and now even if you're eating vegetables and fruit, the nutrients aren't in the food because the soil is required to extract the nutrients. When I say soil, I mean not dirt, which is just without life, but I'm talking about a robust soil ecosystem. Is a symbiotic relationship between the soil, the microorganisms in the soil, the mycorrhizal fungi, and the plants and humans. And so we're seeing drops in mineral levels and protein levels and vitamin levels in our food. Even if we're eating broccoli today, it's not the broccoli we ate 50 years ago.
So let me give you your color commentary and go into a few things he said, which to me should sober all of us. The first is American farmers are in a system that does not work. We are losing thousands and thousands of American farmers who are going out of business.
Or killing themselves.
Or their suicide rates are 3 times higher than ours. I visited with some of these farmers in the Midwest from both parties and saw people that had their Homestead Act deed up. So 5 generations of farmers. The economics worked, and now it's to them, and the economics no longer work because you have this monopolization in the food system where now all of the input companies are consolidated, Monsanto, now Bayer, jacking up the prices of the inputs.
Yeah.
Farmers used to harvest their own seeds and re-put them in. Now they've been patented, they're being sold, Roundup resistant, so you have to buy these chemicals. Yeah. And this way of farming, which we are subsidizing, our Department of Agriculture is built around it, is unsustainable for the farmer's economics. So one farmer said to me, all my costs have gone up. I used to have 5 people to sell, competing for my goods. Now it's 1 or 2 companies because big food is consolidated into a handful of companies, and they're being driven to their share of the consumer dollar has gone down something like 40% in the last a few decades. And so they're shrinking abilities to make it. So the farmers are suffering and going out of business at tough numbers. Our soil is a crisis in our country. We are killing our soil.
Yeah.
Soil runoff is horrible. As you said, it's killing our ecology, seeping into and poisoning groundwater with all these chemicals, flowing into our rivers and streams, down the Mississippi River into the biggest dead zone that's the size of 2 Rhode Islands. Why are you picking on New Jersey?
I don't know. I just 2 Rhode Islands, 1 New Jersey,
2 Connecticut. So we are killing our ecology and climate change, which all of these people who are in the climate movement want to talk about oil and gas companies. Not enough people are talking about the food system and the way we're doing it. The one thing
it's arguably the biggest contributor to climate change.
Yes.
We have to deal with fossil fuels and decarbonize. We also have to deal with our agricultural system.
And that's just for the commodity crops you're talking about, not to mention the perversion of how our grandparents used to raise cattle, used to raise pigs, used to raise chicken, what's happened with these small handful of companies, Tyson's, JB, you name it. They've started to do these massive factory farming operations, which are also creating incredibly horrible runoffs in these CAFOs, where you go to places like Duplin County, North Carolina, and see lagoons of pig feces.
And the health consequences for the people that live around that are horrible, like asthma and respiratory diseases, and the kids are affected.
I've sat with those families in crowded black churches. Often they're in low-income minority neighborhoods, so we could have our cheap bacon. I shouldn't even say that because places like Smithfield just ship it all to China. But the horrific lives of the people that live in these low-income areas that deal with all this runoff, and especially when storms come through, that just pick up all that feces, polluting water. I was in Iowa when campaigning for president, and the people were telling me I can't fish out of my creek anymore, I can't drink the water out of my well. And what most Americans don't realize is we are subsidizing that system as it is to produce those handful of commodity crops. Again, you may be surprised by this data point, but less than 10%, about 7% of our ag subsidies go to the foods that functional medicine doctors tell us the majority of what we should eat.
I mean, 5% of the corn is actually eaten as corn. Most of it's turned into highly deconstructed science ingredients that are reassembled into food-like substances, or that are used for oil, or
soybean oil, corn oil, high fructose corn syrup. This is what we're making cheaper. And so you said from farm to fork. What that means for us in our communities is we could go to a DC corner grocery store and find a Twinkie product, because all of those things we just said are being subsidized in that scientifically engineered product to engineer for addiction. They know how our brains work. Yeah. You're going to pay less for a Twinkie, more for an apple than you will for a Twinkie product. Yeah. So now you're a consumer and you're not paying the true cost. We have decided as a society that we're going to drive down the cost of the foods that make us most sick and drive up the costs for the foods that we need. So you can get a Happy Meal or whatever at McDonald's, these dollar meals. All of that is deeply subsidized. Then we pay for it again on the Medicaid, Medicare costs. And you go down the street and try to get a bucket of salad and it costs $15.
Yeah.
And so we have created a system where everyone is losing. The environment is losing. Our ecology is losing. Animals are losing in the horrific ways that they're being raised. Farmers are losing, and end consumers are losing. And you all are
government's losing by having to pay a third of its tax revenue.
A third of its tax revenue going
with chronic disease. The consequences of our food system.
Right. The only people are winning is these large multinational corporations that are consolidating and have near monopolistic power. And then what do they do when we walk in for the consumer that has heard Dr. Hyman? I was teasing him that I listened to so many of his podcasts. I've gone to bed with him, not in a literal way.
I put him to sleep every night.
I just lie him next to me and he soothes me off. It's very intimate, my friend. It's very intimate. Listen to his podcast. It is. You have amazing guests that are extraordinary. But the people that are really losing in this country right now are the people that want to make healthy choices. But then they walk into the store really charged up for looking at, and they find packaging and things that literally are designed to confuse them or lie to them. First of all, the pictures of the beautiful cows or the beautiful pastoral views don't show what it's like really.
No.
CAFOs and all of that. You don't know what chemicals that are banned in Europe that are actually in that food. And the package labeling, as we were talking, maybe you can expand on that, is confusing as hell.
Yeah, I mean, I think all you said is so important, Cory, because really the whole system, wasn't originally designed to make us sick and ruin the environment, but it's the unintended consequences of food policies that were set in place, 50, 70 years ago, and that haven't been reformed and updated. And that's really, what has to happen. And it has to happen because, as you said, we're seeing this national emergency and this crisis across the whole spectrum of society and government. And it's to me, it's such an urgency that we have to hit it head on. And I don't think the food companies, now that they have what they have, are willing to easily let go of it. They need the government to kind of step in. And one of the ways that has been effective in other countries is food labeling. We don't want to be the nanny state. We don't want to tell people what to do, but we want to inform people. We want to give them choices. We want to educate them about what's good and not good for them. Now, there's a lot of debate about what is good and not good, and the food industry will try to confuse you and say we don't have enough data. But recently, I mean, it's pretty frightening how the food industry gets in the weeds and all this. But we actually now have the ability to label foods with warning labels, like they do in South America, like they do in Europe, like they do in Canada, that are clear and understandable. I mean, unless you have a PhD in nutrition, it's hard to understand a nutrition facts label. I mean, if I said there's 39 grams of sugar in a food, I would ask, how many of you know how many teaspoons that is? Well, maybe if you listen to me on the podcast, you might know, but most people have no clue. Like someone said, I was on the Today Show this morning, and the woman said, yeah, my daughter was having like a sports drink and it had 50 grams of sugar. I said, yeah, that's like more than 12 teaspoons of sugar in a drink, and no idea they're eating that. And so the food industry is very active in trying to block any reform on food labeling. But imagine having front of package labeling saying, this is good for you, this is bad for you. Like they have in other countries, like red is bad for you, yellow, eat with caution, green is good for you. Anybody can understand that. But to look at a food label now or an ingredient list, it's just very confusing. And so we need to make it simple for people to make the right choices. And when they've done that in these countries, they've seen a dramatic change in the health of the population, in what people buy, and they've actually been able to make a dent in the obesity and chronic disease crisis.
Right. And what I love about you, and this is how I feel too, is I don't want to take away anybody's freedom. I know what it feels like to come home from a really hard day.
You don't have many of those in an easy place to work like the U.S. Senate.
Yeah, yes.
Where everybody gets along. And it's a fun party all the time.
Harmonious. I know what it's like to come home tired and stressed after banging your head against implacable walls of resistance. And all I want to do is get into this central embrace with my two best friends, Ben and Jerry. I want that freedom. I don't want somebody to take away that freedom from me.
My friends are Hagen and Das.
Your friends are Hagen and Das. You always like those international types. But I want that freedom. But I don't want the government to subsidize subsidize that, especially when they're not subsidizing fruits and vegetables. And I'll tell you this: how would we feel if we were subsidizing alcohol?
Yeah.
Or subsidizing marijuana?
Subsidizing tobacco.
Or subsidizing tobacco.
We are.
Yes.
Still.
Yes. And so what my point is we believe in freedom, but there's two types of freedom. Freedom of choice. I never want to be the person taking the person making cheeseburger and milkshake out of your hand. I don't want to be that guy. But I want freedom to know as well. Freedom to know what's in your foods.
Yeah.
And their system of food packaging right now is designed to confuse you. For example, I know consumers who look at the ingredients. I do. Let me look at the ingredients. And they're looking for sugar, and it's way down. Well, it's not really way down on the list. Regularly, routinely, what food companies do, which they don't do overseas.
They're not allowed.
They don't allow it. They decide, okay, well, we're going to put 7 different types of sugar into this product, or 5 or 4 different types of sugar in this product, so it doesn't show up as the number one ingredient. So consumers will look at it and say, oh, well, the number one ingredient is wheat, or what have you. That's not bad for you. They try to intentionally confuse the consumers.
Yeah.
And you and I have been saying that the FDA, which does so much drug trials, studies, the FDA, the Federal Food and Drug Administration, does a lot on the D, but we believe they should put the F back in the FDA and start focusing on foods and what they're doing to us, because there are chemicals that we put, dyes and more chemicals that are banned in other countries.
Yeah.
That we allow freely into our food system that are having untold, and I listened to your podcast a lot and read your books about how important we're realizing the microbiome is.
Yeah.
And some of these things we're pouring into our guts that really have effect on our mental health, our physical health, as well as our longevity.
And 22 pounds a year of additives are consumed by people who eat the average American diet. 22 pounds. So they're not like little micro ingredients we're eating. They're pounds. If you're eating 60% of your diet is ultra-processed food, it's 22 pounds. And those have horrible consequences for your gut microbiome, for driving inflammation, for toxicities around cancer. And there's things like butylated hydroxytoluene, which you wouldn't have in your cupboard and sprinkle on your salad, but it's in your food.
Right. And if we took the blood of anybody in here, would there anybody that would not have glyphosate in their?
No. I mean, I try to eat healthy. I mean, I don't always have the capacity to choose everything I'm eating because I travel. But, 80% of Americans have glyphosate in their urine. 80%. And I tested mine as well, and I have it too. And I'm like, we're all...
And glyphosate is a known...
carcinogen. It's a microbiome destroyer. It has generational effects on our epigenome, which causes transgenerational changes in kidney issues and cancer.
And consumers don't know. They don't...
No, nobody knows. I mean, we're, I think, the only country other than, I think, Syria that doesn't allow GMO labeling. Right. There was an act in Congress that was designed to allow for GMO labeling. It was euphemistically called the DARK Act, denying Americans the right to know. And the food industry spent $192 million lobbying Congress over this one bill.
Right.
And Syria and the U.S. are the only countries, and Russia and China, which are not known for their openness, are actually labeling GMOs.
And I'm glad you said that, because it's the end before I want to get really quickly and give the good news, because I think we're telling the dark story right now. But again, we in Congress, I always say after perhaps the defense industrial complex, the next most powerful lobby, because it's bigger.
The food ag lobby is bigger than the defense lobby.
Okay, well, you said it. And it gives to both sides of the political aisle, protecting a system that is bankrupt because it's hurting all of the people that we went through, from the farmers themselves to the end users. We
privatize the profits and socialize the costs.
Right.
So the taxpayers are left holding the bag and the bill.
Right.
And that has to change.
Right. The taxpayers are subsidizing the things that make us sick and then paying for the incredible medical costs. And many Americans feel lost because they live in communities where just finding access to healthy, fresh food.
Hard.
And the very farm system that farmers want, when we were able to make some changes and get climate-smart farm practices through Joe Biden and Congress's Inflation Reduction Act, billions of dollars, farmers flocking to that money because they want to raise organic.
Yeah.
They want to do cover crops. They want to do no-till farming. They want to take on practices because at the end of the day, farmers are good stewards of the land. But if they feel like they're in this system where that's the only thing they know, and the incentives are to do these practices, they're going to continue to do those practices. And the good news, which I want to shift to before we open this up for some questions and other discussion, the good news is we believe that the more, number one, we can educate the public about this, the more pressure we're going to create, because change doesn't come from Washington. It comes to Washington by an informed public that demands suffrage, that demands civil rights, that demands Medicare, that demands organizing rights. All of these things, the changes that we've been able to make, even the EPA and the laws for clean water and clean air happen because of public awareness being raised and demands. And so you believe, and I share this belief, that there are shifts that we can be making in our systems to make them more benefit farmers, to break up these big monopolies that are dominating it by actually enforcing antitrust law, but starting to put the incentives in the right places to produce the outcomes so there's more of a flourish and abundance of healthy foods and more informed consumers about the foods that aren't healthy for us.
Right.
You're okay to choose them, but you should see clearly on labels, should not have deceptivity, should have a transparency as well.
Yeah, I mean, ultra-processed food and sugar, the new tobacco. I mean, when you look at the way the tobacco industry was, they were denying the harmful health effects of it. They were denying the addictiveness of it. And, we know from the Yale Food Addiction Scale, that it's been researched across the globe, that 14% of the global population is technically addicted to food, and 12% of kids. And alcoholism is 14%. So we really are in a situation where we have to hit this head on, and we have to learn how to start to incentivize the right behaviors by educating consumers, by providing the right labeling. Food marketing is another thing. I mean, we allow marketing to our children and also targeting African Americans and Hispanics that is driving their disease rates through the roof. I mean, childhood obesity is now at 40%. Over 25% of kids overweight is 40%. Obesity is around 25%. And if we were having a foreign nation do to our kids what we're doing, we would go to war to protect them. But we're doing it, and And we know that, like, for example, in Chile, where they eliminated all junk food advertising on all medium between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. so the kids wouldn't see it. They eliminated all the cartoon characters. So there's no Tony the Tiger anymore, or the Fruit Loops guy, whatever that is.
Right.
Those don't exist, and on the cereal packaging, and they have the warning labels, and it's that education of consumers and that.
So you're telling me that GMO frosted glyphosate-full wheat covered in sugar is not a healthy. No.
Well, maybe if you're a Martian, I don't know. Definitely not for humans. And it's it's tragic what's happening to our children. And so at the very least, we should be able to protect our children and have child-friendly labeling and have.
Because we have the military come into us and tell us that 70% of American youth right now can't qualify for military service. 70% of American youth can't qualify for military service.
I mean, the irony is that the school lunch program was developed because the recruits in World War II were malnourished, and the federal government put in a school lunch program. Now that same program is causing our kids to be sick and overweight, and 70% don't qualify. What's even scarier is that of the evacuations from Afghanistan and Iraq during those wars, 72% were for obesity-related injuries, not for war injuries, like related to obesity-related causes. And this is not my opinion. This is from Military Readiness, as a group of retired admirals and generals who made these reports.
And so we're spreading out. You and I are for supporting a lot of things, which I just want to make people aware. Those women that came to me at that incredible urban farm, they were benefiting from the GusNIP program, which means that if you have taking what used to be called food stamps to your SNAP benefits to a farmer's market, you can get twice the
double.
Everything doubles. And I was blown away what $5 could buy at this farmer's market. We're supporting the climate smart farming practices and more, working in tangent with farmers like the Farmers Union and others, trying to transform American farmers, bringing it back to our heritage. We're doing a lot to try to force front of label packaging, create targets to lower sugars and salts in industry. There's just a lot of very good
medically tailored meals
and medically tailored
education for doctors and changes in Medicare reimbursement.
Yes,
because for every dollar we spend on food, we're spending $3 in collateral damage.
Yes,
and what the price we pay at the checkout counter is not the true cost of the food. The Rockefeller Foundation had a great report on this, and it was documenting not only the harmful health effects, but the effects on the land and the ecosystems and climate and the social impacts. All these things are quantifiable, and they're bankrupting our country, and we're not paying the cost from the true cost at the checkout counter. And maybe a can of Coke should be $100, and an apple should be 10 cents.
Well, I just want the true cost. All these people who believe in the free market, stop the government subsidies, and let's let the free market decide with the market itself. Again, if you believe in Adam Smith, it's about having market information. It's about knowing. If we had that, then companies would be rushing to give consumers what they really want, because the demand for healthy, fresh foods, every parent wants what's best. You were just stuck in Vegas. It's like a movie. You were stuck there for a while, and then he made the best of it by going to see the Grateful Dead in this year. But it was he had a conference in Vegas, and I'm going to use this as an example. I talked to a head of a major casino operation, a really great guy named Jim Murren, and I was complaining to him as mayor because it was a recession, and I was cutting the size of my government, finding great ways to create new efficiencies. But the two costs I couldn't cover were pension costs and healthcare costs. And so I was complaining to him, and he goes, "Cory, I figured out my healthcare costs." And I thought, I don't know, did you get a new plan? Did you manage? This is like us during the presidential debate when I ran for president. All these people on the debate stage arguing over how are we going to provide healthcare in America? Medicare for all. Oh, we should do this. We should do. Everybody was talking about how to mop up the floor. Nobody was talking about how to turn off the sink, which is a real conversation we should be having in our presidential debates and more. But what was amazing about this corporate leader was that he said, "Cory, I couldn't figure out this problem." Then I went into my cafeteria that fed thousands of my employees, and I see deep fryers and big sugary buns and all of this stuff, and I was kind of horrified. And he ripped it all out, and he said this union and we're like ready to like strike on him because they took away all this great food, but he hired the best chefs come in and cook healthy, nutritious food. And
recipes from my cookbook.
Honestly, I looked through some of this stuff, and I think that he would love this. And it was amazing. Suddenly, his employees shifted from ready to protest him to just loving it even more, and then asking him, Well, this single mother who works 2 shifts at the blackjack table goes home like every pressure that mothers did, like my family did, and runs through the drive-through on the way home. So they said, well, maybe I could take some of this food home. So he let them, and he said, my cost curve started to bend.
That's right.
He got the double bottom line.
Yeah.
He got to save money for his company, but his employees were healthier, had better focus, concentration, all of these health benefits that made them happier and better and more effective at their workforce, not to mention at their family. Well, we're America Inc. right now, and we're supplying all cheap foods that are making us sick, and the costs are going up. We should figure out ways to shift. And so the reason why I enjoyed reading your cookbook is 2 things. One is you tell a beautiful story, and you let us as consumers know that these recipes are so easy, even a senator can make them. But what's more importantly is it's part to me, if I put your books up here, of your incredible passion, which I love, and you've helped my life, is that you believe that Americans are not born to suffer.
No.
That we're born to be healthy and vibrant and thriving. You've seen this from your examinations of, you take guys at major prisons and jails, give them access to fresh and healthy food, and incidents of violence go down, and their success rates go up, all the way to our children who given fresh, healthy foods, their scores go up. But more importantly, at a time that we're suffering a crisis, not just in physical health, but the anxiety, depression.
It's something people don't talk about, right? I mean, the obesity, diabetes, people get it. People don't realize that this food that we're producing in America is causing a mental health crisis. And you know, when you look at the cost burden of all chronic disease, both in terms of direct healthcare costs and also indirect costs, depression and mental illness is number 1. It causes people to be disabled, loss of quality of life years, and the costs are staggering. And we see the disconnect in the brain between the limbic part of the brain and the frontal brain, the old reptile lizard brain, and the adult in the room, which is the frontal lobe. And neuroinflammation is this now well understood phenomena that disconnects the adult in the room from the crazy person in the brain, right? And that neuroinflammation is caused by our ultra processed food and by our diet. And that's something that we haven't really talked about. Is
just take it around your. Yes.
Is the audio good?
Yep, you're good.
I think people haven't realized that the disconnect in the mental health crisis by not talking about food, because food is one of the biggest drivers of depression, anxiety, conflict, aggressiveness, divisiveness, all the things we're seeing now in our society, the polarization. And the food system inadvertently has led to this not only obesity and diabetes crisis, but a crisis of mental health. And it's something that we know can be fixed through fixing the metabolic dysfunctions in the brain.
All right, they'll never invite me back to Sixth and I if I don't get the question. And so there's 2 microphones here. While you all, who have questions, maybe you can come up here and ask the question. And what I'm going to do, though, is first is we have a virtual audience watching as well, and I'm going to answer some of these questions. I think that this first one from Susan B. in Virginia, it doesn't say it here, but I imagine Susan B. in Virginia wishes she lived in New Jersey.
Newark specifically.
Yeah, very specific. I could tell. I can sense it. It's the Garden State. You would love. That must be Dr. Hyman's favorite state.
I used to live in New Jersey.
The Garden.
New Jersey.
We grow great things in our Garden State. The 4th largest producer of eggplant in America. Top that. Right. Do you recommend a chewable probiotic to strengthen your oral microbiome?
No.
I didn't know there was an oral microbiome. I did not know that. If so, what should I look for when choosing a product?
Well, that's a great, very specific question. And the truth is that the microbiome, which is the sum total of all the bugs in us and on us, on our skin and our mouth and our respiratory tract and our guts, all plays a huge role in our health. And we know that the oral microbiome is highly influencing our risk of dementia and our risk of heart disease.
Really?
And obesity, And then having bad teeth and bad gums is a huge risk factor for inflammation throughout the body, which is one of the biggest drivers of all these conditions. So having bad teeth is a real problem. In fact, I was at a conference recently and they were listing from the 1600s what were the major causes of death. And one of the major causes of death was bad teeth.
Wow. One of my friends used to say death enters through the gums.
Yeah. So keeping your gums healthy and your mouth oral microbiome healthy is important. And oral probiotics can be helpful. So I don't have a specific opinion about a particular one, but taking probiotics and chewable probiotics are great.
So when I go into the store, like in 5 years, they're going to be like, choose Wrigley's, the oral probiotic.
Probably
stuff.
with a lot of sugar and
a lot of sugar stuff. All right.
What did Sarah Palin say? You put a lipstick on a pig, it's still a pig.
It's still a pig.
Right. And
okay. We're going to get to her one noble. Finally, she was way first. We're going to get to her, but I'm going to ask before we go to you. One more of the. I want to make sure the virtual people know that we read their comments and their questions. This one's a tough one. I face it every day as one of the few. I'm the black sheep of the family, the vegan amongst us. What advice do you have to navigate differences in food and diet choices within a family? And when some family members see choices as being picky or fancy rather than health-driven?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it should be a choice between healthy eating and delicious eating. I think that's a false dichotomy.
Right.
To think that you have to suffer and starve and eat like cardboard in order to actually be healthy is a huge myth. And it's unfortunate myth because, it's promulgated by the food industry that is encouraging us to indulge and pleasure ourselves. In fact, the food industry was just called out for hiring all these nutritionists and dietitians to go online and talk about why people should just indulge their cravings and should not restrict their diets and should eat as much as they want and should have all these indulgent foods. And it was an expose. It was in the Washington Post. And it was frightening. Like 40% of the nutritionists on social media are paid by the food industry to give misinformation about what they're eating.
And a lot of these studies that come out that says sugar is the new whatever or whatever are paid for by the
food industry. I mean, and all the recommendations. I mean, the American Diabetes Association was just sued by their head nutritionist because they fired her because she wouldn't endorse the foods that they were recommending. And $134 million of their budget is given by the pharma industry and a huge portion by the food industry. And so they're not incentivized to actually do the right thing. And many of these associations have been co-opted, and I detail that in my book. But the truth is, if you have a family, get in the kitchen together, go shopping together, go to the farmers markets, get what people like, and make delicious versions of what you like. And a lot of the recipes in the book and the cookbook are indulgent recipes, but they're made with helpful ingredients.
Yes.
And they can taste good, and they are good for you. So you can love food that loves you back.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Okay, we're going to go to the first person. Introduce yourself and tell people what your relationship to New Jersey is. I mean, I'm sorry. tell people what your question is.
Actually, well, first, before I say anything, I think I speak for everyone.
Can you get closer to the mic?
Yes. I think I speak for everyone here. Thank you for your unwavering support for Israel and your fight against anti-Semitism. It's really important and off topic, but thank you.
Thank you.
Also,
Cory's an honorary Jew. He speaks Hebrew better than I do.
My connection to New Jersey is you were the one who helped me decide to use a wheelchair because on my Amtrak train home in 2008 from New Jersey, I only had a cane and I fell flat in your lap face first. And I was like, it's time. Get a wheelchair. So thank you, New Jersey.
You're the one person that has ever fallen for me.
I will fall as many times as you would like for you.
Thank you very much.
My question is that it's hard to get a lot of this information. I read last week about a study that came out that the reason there's double colon cancer in young adults is because of what we eat.
Yeah.
But it's hard to get the information. So thank you, Cleveland Clinic. Thank you, Mayo, Hopkins. But the reason I'm understanding that a lot of the information isn't public is because all these food studies are funded by Big Pharma.
Yeah.
So they want to hide it as much as possible. Yeah. And so between Big Pharma and food deserts and the rising price of farmland and how people like Bill Gates own it all, how is it that we could even attempt to start this fight? Because it looks like we're already starting at such a deficit.
Yeah.
And my other question is, I can't believe I'm saying this. Could we model things after the soda industry? Like now they're saying there's a lot of calories. Buy one of our mini ones and they clearly label like 0 calories on the front of it. Like how much could we learn from Coke and Pepsi?
Oh, I don't know. That's a hard one.
I know. I feel ridiculous saying that.
No, that's good. Go ahead, Dr. Hyman.
I mean, I think the policies that we have to implement are ones that help to really hit this straight on. And one of the big challenges is that there's been a lack of funding for nutrition. At the National Institute of Health, they have all the institutes of diseases. They don't have a National Institute of Health. They're not studying health. And so you study diabetes or heart disease or Alzheimer's. These are all downstream. And there's no National Institute of Nutrition, which we should have, and many other countries have. The food industry spends $12 billion a year, 12 times as much money as the federal government and philanthropy on research on food. So when you look at the data as a result of these studies, they're 8 to 50 times more likely to show a positive benefit for their particular product. So, for example, there's a study in, I think, the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition that artificial sweeteners are fine and they're not harmful for you. And it was funded by the American Beverage Association. So, basically science has been bought and paid for, and we think we're gearing independent science. And that's why consumers are so confused, because they're hearing all kinds of things that are not making sense, and the food industry is attempting to, on purpose, confound and confuse the American public. And through many channels, right? Through their efforts on co-opting professional associations like the American Heart Association, the American Diabetes Association. 40% of the Academy of Nutrition Dietetics budget comes from the food industry. You have social groups like Hispanic Federation or the NAACP funded by Coke and Pepsi and the food industry. So they'll not oppose policies like, they'll not support policies like soda tax, for example. They have social, they have some front groups like the American Council on Science and Health that says pesticides, tobacco, and high fructose corn syrup are all good for you, And just one thing after the other, and they hijack science and scientific community. They hijack the government through intensive lobbying. So they've got this covered, and it's not a kind of random bunch of different things that are happening. It's a cohesive strategy. And I think if you had Discovery, you'd find out. And the American Diabetes Association was recently sued, and they settled with the former nutrition director without going to court because they didn't want Discovery. Because if they had Discovery, it means all their kind of dealings with the food industry would be exposed. So I think we have as a government have to hold these professional associations to account. We have to hold science to account. We have to fund the right science, and we have to be the keepers of the integrity. Right now we have government by the corporations, for the corporations, of the corporations. No longer by the people, for the people, of the people. And then we need to go back to that.
Just this gentleman here.
Thank you all both for being here. Henry Lewis of Richmond, Virginia. I'm a fan of both of you. As someone with a graduate degree in nutrition, and I also work in medical education, one of the things that annoys me the most is going to the doctor and hearing bad nutrition advice or bad nutrition advice.
Oh, yeah.
As someone who works in med ed and has a nutrition degree.
You're getting any nutrition advice is a miracle. But anyway.
Yeah. So what are we doing to educate the new generation of doctors, whether it's through residency, medical school, as well as current practice?
It's one of the things we're working on. So there's $17 billion that the federal government spends for graduate medical education to fund residencies and internships. There's no requirements for how those dollars are used or any, mandate, for example, for nutrition education as part of that. That's changing. So we've made progress on that front to actually make those residency and fellowship programs include nutrition education. We're also working with the Association of Medical Schools, who are now coming along and going to start including nutrition education. And doctors have to learn about this. The number one killer in the world is food. It kills 11 million people conservatively every year, more than tobacco, and more than all the wars and weapons and everything else combined. And yet, doctors know nothing about nutrition, which is the biggest killer and the biggest cause of all the diseases that their patients are coming in with. That needs to change. My daughter's in medical school now, and she's got nothing. I was like, did you learn about nutrition? Yeah, well, we learned about amino acids and, fatty acids and carbohydrates. What are you going to tell your patient to have for lunch?
Amino acids.
Thank you, sir.
So, yes, we're working on nutrition education bills, and multiple senators and congressmen are working on reforming medical education as well. So it's happening. That's part of the initiatives we're working on with the food fix.
I'm going to go to the gentleman behind here. I know they came up early. Now I'm going to go to you if you don't mind. Sir.
Hi, thank you both for your talk. I'm William, based in Maryland. So I have a good friend who's currently dealing with some obesity issues, and he's like a PhD student, which means he's super busy and doesn't have too much money to buy like healthy meals. And every day he was, not every day, every week he's complaining to me that I wish I can buy more broccoli or salad, but the situation is I'm stuck with a frozen pizza every week because it's cheaper and it's faster to make. So if you are in my situation, what advice would you give?
Yeah, I think this is a really common belief that it's more expensive, it takes too much time, and it's too difficult to eat real food. And, I was part of a movie called Fed Up 10 years ago, which talked about childhood obesity in the food industry. And as part of that movie, I went to work with a family in South Carolina, Easley, South Carolina, which is one of the worst food deserts in America. They have something called the Retail Food Environment Index. How many fast food and, bodegas are there to a healthy grocery store? So it's like 10 to 1 there. The family was a family of 5, lived in a trailer on food stamps and disability. The father was 42, already on dialysis from diabetes, from kidney failure. The mother was 100 plus pounds overweight. The son was, 50% body fat at 16, practically diabetic, should be like 10 to 20%. And, they lived on $1,000 a month in food stamps and disability payments. And I'd rather give them a lecture. I basically went to their house, went shopping, and got simple ingredients, real food. They were inexpensive, and it was from a guidebook called Good Food on a Tight Budget from the Environmental Working Group. How to eat food that's good for you, good for the planet, and good for your wallet. And rather than giving a lecture, I just said, let's cook together. And they'd never cooked a real food in their life. They were trying to eat low-fat this and, healthy that with all the basically garbage marketing that's on most of our food that makes it look good, right? Like you said, nice pictures of the farms and the pastures where all these animals come from CAFOs. Well, my rule is if it has a health claim on the label, it's bad for you. If it's gluten-free potato chips, it's bad for you, right? And
if it says health food, you're like,
oh yeah, if it's got a health claim, it's definitely bad for you. Low fat, low high fiber, this, that. It just means they're kind of tweaking the ingredients to make some kind of health claim, and it's generally highly processed food. So we made the simple meal. I told them how to peel garlic. I showed them how to chop vegetables. I showed them how to stir fry things. We made turkey chili. We made just simple food, salad with regular veg salad and some olive oil and vinegar dressing, not dressing that was filled with high fructose corn syrup and refined oils and all kinds of thickeners and emulsifiers that were really bad for them. And I said, look, you can do this. Here's this guidebook. Here's my one of my older cookbooks. And I'm like, I don't know if this is going to work. And they didn't have cutting boards. They didn't have knives. I said, okay, well, I flew back on the plane. I literally went on Amazon. I ordered them cutting boards and knives shipped to their house. A week later, the mother texts me. She says, we lost 18 pounds as a family. We're doing it. A year later, they lost 200 pounds as a family. The father lost 45, got a new kidney. The mother lost 100 pounds. The son lost 50, then went to work at Bojangles because it was the only place to work down in the South. Gained it all back. He said it was like putting an alcoholic to work in a bar. Eventually got his act together, called me up and said, I really want to get healthy again. I said, okay, let's do it. And I guided him. He lost 132 pounds. He was the first kid in his family to go to college. And he asked me for a letter of recommendation for medical school. And now he's a doctor.
wow.
So I don't believe the propaganda from the food industry that it takes too much time, it's difficult, and it's expensive. Yeah, you're not going to have a $70 grass-fed ribeye steak, but there are cheaper cuts of meat, cheaper vegetables, cheaper beans and grains, and cheaper nuts and seeds. And there's things you can get through outlets and Costco's and big box stores, so Trader Joe's. So you can actually eat well for less. And the truth is, the cost to you is such a benefit, or the benefit to you is so high. If you look at what we were talking about before, basically the amount of disability and brain fog and feeling like crap, I call it FLC syndrome, when you feel like crap, is massive. And presenteeism is a huge problem. Globally, we lose $2 trillion a year from people being at the job but not on the job. And so we have to understand that our well-being, our energy, our focus, our productivity, our happiness, our joy, all depends on the food we eat. And it's good for us, but it's also good for our families and for our communities and for our nation. And so I feel like I'm a kind of a lone voice in the wilderness, but this is really a national emergency at every level, from national security to our ability to produce the food we need to produce, to our ability to deal with the economic burden of it, the academic crisis in our children. I mean, it's just one thing after the other, and it's all connected by the food.
Powerful.
Thank you.
Powerful. Yes, please.
Yeah, hi. So I'm actually a physician and nephrologist, and I now work at NIH. We do have an Office of Nutrition. It's tiny and needs better funding. So there. But that wasn't my question. I just had to throw that in there.
But I think the only time that in the National Institute of Health strategy that was put out by Francis Collins, the only time food was mentioned was as part of the sentence that included the Food and Drug Administration. So it's not a problem.
I will not disagree with you on that. I agree. No, Mike, I was curious, you're thinking about these new, the GLP drugs that are out there, the anti-obesity drugs.
Yeah.
I didn't hear you mention those. I was just wondering what your thoughts were.
I am wondering that too. Thank you for the question. Must be from New Jersey.
What about the new drugs? Listen, we're in a crisis and people are desperate. And,
Yes.
and if you haven't seen the South Park movie about obesity, you should watch it. And it basically...
Is it an episode or is it a new movie?
Well, it's like an hour-long episode, maybe. Okay. I don't know. I don't really watch it that often, but somebody sent it to me to watch. And it basically shows these sort of suburban moms who become terrorists because the supply of Ozempic goes down, and they literally are robbing pharmacies, and they're, and Cartman is basically trying to get Ozempic for himself, and his friends have a chemistry lab where they're making a kind of a compounded version, and these suburban moms attack them with masks on and guns, and their midriff showing because they all want to like how skinny they are, and it's kind of funny, but it's a problem. Again, I think for some people these drugs can be very helpful and very effective. I think when you look at scaling this up, the entire Medicare Part B, which is our drug benefit program, is $145 billion. If just the obese, not the overweight, if just the obese Medicare patients got the drug, it would cost $245 billion, which would basically dwarf the expenditures of all drugs for all of Medicare right now. So it's not really a sustainable solution. Yes, the prices can come down, and maybe that'll happen. And yes, in Canada and in Europe and Germany, they're like, instead of $1,300 a month, it's like $100 or $200. And so these drugs can have a place, but it kind of misses the point, which is why are we obese in the first place? It's not Ozempic deficiency, right? It's our toxic food system, and we have to deal with the reality of where people are. And some people may benefit from these drugs. We also have to deal with the reality of our food system. So both have to be dealt with. And these can have long-term consequences that we're just learning about. So, there was a great article in the New England Journal that came out years ago that said, be sure you use new drugs as soon as they come out on the market before the side effects develop, right? So just wait a few years. You're going to see bowel obstruction, pancreatitis, and a bunch of other issues, muscle loss, wasting, regaining weight. So I think they're not a panacea and they're not risk-free, but I think they can be used effectively in some patients.
And I think this is going to be, that was our last question, because I think that's what you're announcing.
Oh, I was going to say, yes, we're running short on time. So if the three people standing can please keep their questions super brief, and we'll take all three questions and then give you the last word.
I'll be brief.
Okay.
Thank you.
Why don't we get them all out, and then we'll answer them all at the end.
Oh, I'm not sure my memory's that good. I have Alzheimer's.
I have a pen, and I will take notes as people put the question. So 1, 2, 3.
Hi, my name is Vadim Zhitnikov. I'm from Arlington, Virginia. And right now,
Is that a suburb of New Jersey?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And right now I'm getting my NP degree, and I was wondering, how does one become a functional medicine practitioner? Is there a program that you would recommend or things like that? And then kind of a segue of that question, how does one becomes an activist to raise that awareness in the public that we can change the laws and change the system?
Yeah.
And make that awareness. Thank you.
So the gentleman here, sir.
My name's Daniel. So this is for Senator Booker. How do you justify incorporating meat into the diet with the negative health, environment, and ethical consequences?
You asking me or Doc?
He's asking me. Him.
Me. Okay.
Okay. Good. Okay. Hold on. As a vegan, I'm dying to hear his answer. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I'm Anna Irani. I also work at NIH in Human Resources. If there were three things you could get every American to do like this week, I'd be curious what those are.
Three things?
This is such a big problem, and there's so many things to be done. But I was wondering if you would have us focus as a public, what would those things be?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to start with the first question: how to become a functional medicine.
Well, I remember the questions, actually.
Oh, you do? Okay,
let's see how I do.
Okay. I wish you would ask that question for a guy who couldn't pass organic chemistry.
You wanted to be a doctor? Had to be a senator instead?
Yeah.
So thank you, by the way, for being in the medical field and caring about these issues and being an advocate for transformation. As a physician, you're well trained in basic science, but we don't learn about the science of health. And the Institute for Functional Medicine, where I've been chairman of the board, I've been on the faculty for 20 years, 25 years, is a great organization that trains practitioners in functional medicine. And you can go to ifm.org. It's a nonprofit. There's training curriculums. They're online and they're great. As far as being an advocate goes, I think, we all can do our part where we feel called to do it. And it may be something as simple as, composting your food, or maybe something as big as, being an activist in Washington. Never underestimate, Margaret Mead said this, never estimate the power of a small group of highly committed people to change the world. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has. So people can make a difference. If you want to learn more, go to foodfix.org. There's a guide on there called the Food Fix Action Guide, or maybe you can go to foodfixbook.com, and the action guide is on there. And it's basically a 20, 30-page guide on what you can do individually, what you can do professionally, what you can do as a philanthropist, as a business, as an advocate, what policymakers can do. So what has to happen across the board to actually drive the changes we need to see.
And then one thing I would add to that, just on activism, I've learned that one really important definition of leadership is not how many people you can get to follow you, but how many people you can get to see that they are leaders themselves. So ignite other people. There are a lot of goodwill people that just don't know yet. This is why I gave your book, Food Fix, to other people I knew, because I knew I knew they were innately activists, but once they had the information, they would be out there being truth tellers as well. So share the information, get other people to join this movement as leaders as well.
Yeah. And the vegan question is an important question. I think about 2% of the American population is vegan.
Mighty 2%.
Mighty 2%. Very loud 2%.
Yeah.
I'm not opposed to it. I think there's many ways to eat healthfully. I think it's hard to do it, to get the nutritional density you need, but you can. And I think you have to do it smartly, and you have to not rely on a lot of what I call vegan junk food, which is also highly processed, refined carbohydrates and starches, which is kind of often the go-to. In terms of the issue of animal and plant and humans and the whole ecosystem, 100% how we're raising animals now is criminal. It's criminal for the animals, for the earth, the ecosystem and the climate, and for human health. So there's no argument those should be banned and they should be stopped, period. That doesn't mean that animals integrated into a regenerative agriculture system are bad. In fact, they can be extremely effective even if you don't eat them. And I recently visited a ranch actually in Texas, which is called Rome Ranch. And basically a young couple bought 1,000 acres right next to all the other cattle ranches, and they decided to raise bison. And they did it in a regenerative way with no till, with allowing just the animals to do their thing and not really adding feed or, they had water. And they found that they were able to restore the ecosystem in such a way that they were add 6% organic matter into the soil in just a few years. For every 1% of organic matter, the soil holds 25,000 gallons of water. The farmers, the ranchers right next to them, and you can see this because they were, the fences were suffering a drought. They had to sell off all their cattle. They couldn't raise animals anymore. And meanwhile, this bison ranch was thriving. Wild animals were coming back. Bald eagles were coming back. They had multi-species on the farm. The soil matter was increasing organic matter. All these things were happening, and they were creating an incredibly helpful source of food, which is very nutrient dense. And I think eating a regeneratively raised bison versus a CAFO cow, steer, is a completely different thing. And we're learning a lot about how these animals are such an integral part of the ecosystem. And one of the key aspects of regenerative agriculture is to include animals as part of the ecosystem, to recycle nutrients and the soil and the earth. I think in that movie, Food Inc. that you were in, there was a great scene of this guy who was a regular farmer and he couldn't make it and he had to sell agrochemicals and agricultural seeds from big seed companies. And he kind of got sick of it all and decided to create a model of regenerative farming where he had sheep and pigs and things in this kind of weird thing. I don't know what he called it, but basically moved it through his farm to fertilize the soil and still grow the crops, but do it in a way that restored the ecosystem, had less inputs, saved money, and made him more money and created a healthier environment. So I think, being an ethical vegan is fine. From a health perspective, I think, there's a way to do it well, but there's also a way to not do it well. And
let's use me as an example. He's a good friend. I don't mind putting myself back on his table. First of all, he took my blood. I don't know why he had to stab me so hard to get it.
Yeah.
But you took my blood and you said, Cory, you're a junk food vegan.
Yeah.
And you're lacking in B12. I think you told me.
B12, iron, omega-3s, vitamin D. Yeah.
You don't have to put it all out there, man. I didn't want to give them my whole profile.
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
I just broke my HIPAA violation.
Yeah,
I'm going to go to jail.
But yes, B12, iron, omega-3s, which are things that I think vegans have to be smart
about.
Yeah, but not that everybody doesn't need to be smart about their nutrients, because I'm sure most Americans are low in things. But as a guy who's very health conscious and tries to eat well, there's certain things that you said to me, hey, Cory, you've got to figure out how to source this.
Yeah.
And even just right now, you were telling me that I'm old. And that I needed to get more protein.
Yeah, so you're going to need to eat sort of like, concentrated proteins like pea protein, and the ones that are supplemented with amino acids that'll help build muscle as you get older. Yeah.
Right. So I think that choices are fine. The diversities in diets are fine, even though you keep pushing eggs on me. If they're blessed by Buddhist monks, Cory, can't you eat them? And, whatever.
Trying.
But the reality is you can make choices, but you should make smart choices. Yeah. And the truth is, and because I was, as you said, I was in that documentary that you talked about, the more we're returning to the centuries-old agricultural practices that human beings thrived on, where there were soil being regenerative soil practices that often involved animals.
Has to, right? I mean, think about it. There were 168 million ruminants in America. They were grazing all across. It created the incredible breadbasket that we have in the Midwest with 50 feet of topsoil. It was like, I think in the movie he called it, Iowa mother load or something.
Yes, but we're losing that soil now because of our current practices at a very alarming rate.
Yeah, and so it's actually animals are essential for the ecosystem to thrive.
Okay, so before I give my sort of closing...
Was there one more question?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. You got to get this last question about, they're asking specifics. Three things for every American to do. If you could get every American to do 3 things this week, what would you get them to do?
First, I would get them to give up liquid sugar calories, which is a huge driver of obesity. The second would be to give up ultra-processed food. And the third would be to add a lot of colorful fruits and vegetables to your diet.
That's amazing. Okay, before I go, I try to be the only big black goy that could give a Jewish man Jewish guilt. So my favorite parsha is...
parsha is a part of a Torah reading for those non-Jews in the...
Yes, my favorite parsha,
Like I said, he knows more Hebrew than I do.
Is this extraordinary story about the father of 3 of our great human faiths, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, Abraham. And Abraham was said to be favored by God because he kept his tent open on all 4 sides and people were welcome. And one day after Abraham had joined the covenant, he had done something you don't recommend, but circumcised himself. We will move quickly past that. He was sitting in pain by his tent, and the Torah says that strangers that were different than him, I've talked to some rabbinical scholars that were different race, very different strangers, were approaching his tent, and he stands up and he runs to them. He doesn't just greet them, hey, come over, my tent's open. No, he runs with them with joy in his heart to welcome the stranger.
Yeah.
And then what you'll love about this story is he brings them into the tent and he gives them his best food.
Yeah.
His best food.
Yeah.
And this idea in cultures going back a millennia all across the globe, this idea of food being a place that brings us together, that creates what you said at the very beginning in your blue zone. You talked about community. And this idea of the American family sitting around a dinner table, which is becoming less and less the reality, especially the reality without a TV screen on. The fact that you're celebrating the power and the magic of food, I think, gets us back to the Abrahamic ideals. And the fact that you're trying to create community in this country around activism to reclaim our health, it is a celebration of the song sung during the high holidays, Ki beiti beit tefillah l'chol, may my house be a house of prayer for all nations. Thank you, Dr. Hyman, for being someone who is seeking again to bring us all together around one tent, around one metaphorical table, to have great food for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Cory. If you love that last video, you're going to love the next one. Check it out here.